top of the morning.
Howdy there, friends, family, adversaries, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary folks. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Riley Constantine, and today we are talking about Artemis Fowl, which is a movie that is streaming on Disney Plus that is a huge pile of shit. The real killer app that Disney Plus obviously needs. So, yeah, there isn't really much to add here. This is just a review of Artemis Fowl, and with that, on to the video. Artemis Fowl had a promising premise. According to people that I trust with my life, i.e. people who have read the books, this Kenneth Branagh film is based on a good young adult fantasy book series of the same name about an Irish asshole-ish child genius born into a wealthy family that exploits the divisions between the human world and the secret underground fantasy fairy world for personal gains. Yes, Artemis Fowl is a rare young adult series of books where the protagonist is a bad guy. While the title character of Artemis Fowl is shown to have some redeemable characteristics, he unequivocally starts the series as a villain, which is an incredibly unique angle for a fantasy series. Whatever your thoughts may be on that, this is a good hook. Having a young protagonist portrayed as a criminal mastermind is a very interesting idea for a fantasy story, and I was really hoping to see what Disney would do with that. I mean, that's just a killer idea, but unfortunately, Disney botched it worse than John Carter. Let me not mince words here. Artemis Fowl is the worst movie I have endured this year. While I admittedly haven't seen many movies this year due to COVID-19, this does not change the fact that Artemis Fowl is abysmally bad. Hell, we can describe it as foul if you want to get cutesy. Whatever the case, this movie is awful and it fails as an adaptation, a modern blockbuster, fantasy film, and even being enjoyable trash. Artemis Fowl is just a miserable experience, and not even a thespian director, Judi Dench, or Colin Farrell can save it. It is damned. Many of Artemis Fowl's problems are due to the way in which the story is told. Unlike the books, the film's version of the titular Artemis Fowl is less villainous and lacks that morally ambiguous edge, which both were core features that made the premise of the book so intriguing. Instead of extorting the fairy world for money like he does in the novels, the movie's version of Artemis has more understandable goals. In the movie, Artemis's father is kidnapped and the boy genius concocts a scheme to use fairies and other magical creatures to save his father's life. In theory, this less morally ambiguous human motivation that reconfigures and recontextualizes Artemis's character traits and actions makes him a much more relatable and sympathetic character to the audience. But in reality, making Artemis's goals more understandable undermines the main point of intrigue for the character and the series as a whole. He is supposed to be a bad guy, and writing him to be more sympathetic makes him a far less interesting anti-hero than he could have been. This feels like a massive cop-out. While the movie's version of Artemis has traces of villainous characteristics, the presentation is shoddy. The film attempts to portray the kid as a self-described criminal mastermind, but from what I understand of the source material, he's so defanged comparatively that describing him as a criminal mastermind goes well beyond the suspension of disbelief. Artemis is not a villain here. Sure, his actions inadvertently cause some fairies to lose their lives, but his goals are entirely humane. He just wants to save his daddy, Colin Farrell, and saving Colin Farrell is a thing we can all easily get behind. Sadly though, this character change does not work. The character is a constant contradiction. It is such a stretch to say that he is a criminal mastermind or that he's even a bad guy. I mean, the movie explicitly says or implies that he is at times, but some of his behavior says otherwise, and as a result, I felt mixed feelings about this character and the story that I doubt were intentional. And when a movie unintentionally makes you feel conflicted about how you're supposed to view the main character, you know there's a fucking problem. And it ain't just Josh Gad eating dirt and shitting it into someone's mouth.
It's feeding time.
God, that's embarrassing. Artemis Fowl, the movie, additionally contains major structural problems, especially in the first act of the film. Way too much information is relayed to the audience via exposition dumps by Josh Gad, who plays Mulch Diggums, who is a tall dwarf. And yeah, it's a thing. While I firmly believe that effective and fluid exposition is an underappreciated art form in cinema, the movie's tendency to explain information to the audience rather than visually showing it through natural action and dialogue is obnoxiously overbearing. And this exposition is especially grating, seeing as so much of it is said by Josh Gad, who plays his character with a deep, gravelly voice as if he were trying to intimidate us. But the problem here is that he is Josh Gad. He is generally the comic relief character. He's fucking Olaf.
And he talks like a less effective Christian Bale Batman while delivering horribly written exposition.
Sorry, I had a cough.
Rather than be intimidating, it's annoying. And also, he eats dirt and shits it out into a fairy's mouth. It's hard to get really intimidating vibes from that.
Judi Dench sadly does not fare much better here. She plays a hardened fairy police chief named Commander Root, and she growls all her lines, even ridiculous ones like, "Get the four-leaf clover out of here." Alone, she's bad, but when combined with the irritating Josh Gad, the movie feels like a mumble fest at times. If I was her, I would be ashamed to have this movie on my filmography. Even beyond the bad performances, the wonky story structure, as well as how Artemis is just a watered down version of himself in terms of his moral ambiguity, there is also a major problem that the film's biggest character arc just does not land. And no, I'm not talking about Artemis Fowl's character arc, because he doesn't have any. That's always a good sign in a movie. You would think that the titular anti-hero Artemis Fowl would have the biggest character arc in a movie called Artemis Fowl. But Artemis is so supernaturally good at everything, ranging from combat to intelligence, that he does not have much room to grow, especially considering the aforementioned nerfing of his morally ambiguous traits that were more prominent in the books. Instead, Artemis Fowl's biggest character arc comes from a supporting character. A fairy police officer named Holly Short wants to clear her deceased innocent father's name from criminal wrongdoing and desires a big break in her policing career. Despite being a cliche, she definitely has the biggest character arc in this movie, but it falls flat. By the end, her arc concludes in such an unearned, unsatisfactory manner that any emotional impact is mild at best and non-existent at worst. And at the end, unsatisfactory filmmaking, as well as non-existent emotional connection to the movie, it perfectly describes the mess that is Artemis Fowl, the movie. Beyond core nuts and bolts flaws like its story structure, editing, bad CGI, and stiff performances, Artemis Fowl fails to give you a reason to give a damn about the drama on screen. All the characters' actions on screen, especially those of Artemis Fowl, do not match the message that the film is trying to convey on a consistent basis. And when the themes and the story are so regularly bungled from start to finish, it is hard to care about a movie. Artemis Fowl is a failure because it stumbles and trips headfirst over simple yet critical fundamental parts of filmmaking. Avoid at all costs. To sum up, Artemis Fowl is very bad. Avoid it like racist relatives. Avoid it like COVID-19. Avoid it like racist relatives with COVID-19. It was a waste of time for me to watch it, though I'm glad that you guys are watching this video, so thank you. Yeah, don't watch this. Not even for amusement. It's really that bad. See ya. And with that, I'd like to thank my patrons, especially my high tier ones, which are Slasher Vales, Mom, Miles Nelson, and David Devlin. Thank you so much for supporting what I do. Love y'all.